بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. Last week we spoke about how the Ayyubid ruler Al-Kamil agreed and signed a treaty with Frederick, the Christian emperor of Germany, in the year 627 of the Hijrah, which corresponds to the year 1229 of the Gregorian calendar. And in this agreement, Al-Kamil agreed to give Frederick and the Christians Jerusalem. He surrendered Jerusalem to the Christians, and in exchange for that, Frederick and the Christians agreed that they would not attack Egypt or any of the other lands under Al-Kamil throughout the length of this agreement. And the agreement was made for 10 years. So we spoke about that great betrayal, how Al-Kamil, who was the nephew of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, Al-Kamil gave Jerusalem back to the Christians. Right? And this was a great act of treachery and a great act of betrayal to the Muslim Ummah. He gave up Jerusalem to preserve his own kingdom, to preserve his rule, to preserve his throne over Egypt. He gave up Jerusalem without a fight. Right? So this is something that was very shameful. Now, Al-Kamil died in the year 1238 of the Gregorian calendar, and after he died, his son Adil II took over Egypt. So Al-Kamil, his father was Adil, the brother of Salahuddin Ayyubi. And the son of Kamil was also named Adil. He named him after his father. Right? So this Adil, the son of Kamil, who took over Egypt after Al-Kamil died, he was known as Adil II. So he took over Egypt after Al-Kamil died. Alright, now the agreement that Al-Kamil made with Frederick and the Christians, this 10-year agreement giving them Jerusalem, part of this agreement was that the Christians agreed that they would not build any fortresses in Jerusalem. They would keep it just as a religious city, and they would not build any fortresses in the city. So while the Ayyubids were busy with internal fighting, the Ayyubids were fighting amongst themselves, they were fighting with the Seljuks, right? This Muslim infighting was going on. The Christians took this as an opportunity. They said, look, the Muslims are busy fighting amongst each other, so we can take this as an opportunity to achieve our goals and our objectives. And they wanted, it was from their goals that, they wanted Jerusalem permanently. The agreement was that they would have it for 10 years, and then after that, if the Muslims try to get it back, they may fight and they may try to get Jerusalem back after 10 years, after the treaty is over. So the Christians wanted to make sure that Jerusalem was fortified, and after that period of 10 years, they were hoping that they could stop the Muslims from trying to take it back. Right? But they had agreed that during the period of that treaty, they're not going to build any fortresses. But they really wanted to build fortresses because they wanted to prepare for what happens after the treaty is over. Because they knew that the Muslims are eventually going to try to take the city back. So while they saw the Muslims fighting with each other, Ayyubids fighting with the Ayyubids, fighting with the Seljuks, they saw all of this going on. They saw that the Muslims were distracted from the Christians. So they decided that let's start building fortresses in Jerusalem to prepare for the time that is going to come after the treaty is over. So they started building fortresses in Jerusalem. They built a fortress that is known as the Tower of Dawood, Husni Dawood. They built that during this period, during the period of the treaty where they were not supposed to be building any fortresses. Alright, so when they started building fortresses, the Ayyubid ruler An-Nasir Dawood, who was in charge of Jordan at this time, he was the ruler of Jordan, An-Nasir Dawood, and he was the son of Mu'azzam, who was the son of Adil. So An-Nasir Dawood was the grandson of Adil. He was the grandson of Adil, who was the brother of Salahuddin. So at this time, An-Nasir Dawood he was the Ayyubid ruler of Jordan. So when he saw that the Christians are building fortresses in Jerusalem, he saw that as a betrayal of the agreement that the Christians had with the Ayyubids. Part of the agreement was they're not supposed to build any fortresses, and look, they're building a fortress. So he saw that as a betrayal of the treaty, and he started to make preparations to reconquer Jerusalem from the Christians. So An-Nasr Dawood, he got support from the Khawarizmi gangs. Remember we talked about Ad-Dawla al-Khawarizmiyya and how the Mongols defeated them. And when the Mongols defeated them, they left Persia and they came into Sham, but they were not able to re-establish their state in Sham. But there were multiple gangs of Khawarizmis who still maintained some power and some influence. They didn't have an official state, but they still had their soldiers. And those soldiers basically would hire themselves out as soldiers of fortune, basically as mercenaries. So you could hire those Khawarizmi soldiers, you could pay them money, and they would join your army and they would fight on your side. So An-Nasr Dawood, he got support from some of these Khawarizmi gangs that were there in Sham, who were working as mercenaries. So 10,000 of those Khawarizmi soldiers, 10,000 of those Khawarizmi soldiers, they joined An-Nasr Dawood, and his goal, his objective was to retake Jerusalem from the Christians. So An-Nasr Dawood, with the help of these Khawarizmiyin, he was able, alhamdulillah, to conquer Jerusalem back from the Christians. So he took Jerusalem back for the Muslims once again. And this happened in the year 637 of the Hijrah, which corresponds to the year 1239 of the Gregorian calendar. So the Christians occupied Jerusalem for 10 years. When Kamil made that agreement, it was the year 1229. Now An-Nasr Dawood has taken Jerusalem back, it's 1239. So the Christians had Jerusalem under their control this time for 10 years before An-Nasr Dawood took it back for the Muslims, walhamdulillah. And after taking back Jerusalem, An-Nasr Dawood, he continued to take back other cities that were given up by his uncle Kamil to the Christians as well. Remember, in this agreement, Al-Kamil, the main city that he gave to the Christians was Jerusalem, but he also gave up a number of other cities as well. So now An-Nasr Dawood is one by one taking back these cities that his uncle Kamil had surrendered to the Christians 10 years earlier. So now many battles between the Ayyubids and the Christians started again, just like old times. The Christians and the Ayyubids fighting with each other. All right, now in the meantime, in Egypt, as we mentioned, after Al-Kamil died, his son Adil II became the ruler of Egypt. But in the year 638, just about 2 years into Adil II's rule of Egypt, his brother, the brother of Adil II, Najmuddin Ayyub, he was able to overthrow his brother and take over Egypt. So look at the infighting that's going on within the Ayyubids. Right? This brother overthrew his brother. Najmuddin Ayyub overthrew his brother Adil II. And they were both sons of Kamil. They were both sons of Al-Kamil. So in the year 638 of the Hijri calendar, which corresponds to the year 1240 of the Gregorian calendar, Najmuddin overthrew his brother Adil II and he took over Egypt. Now, Najmuddin Ayyub, he had a slave girl that he loved very much. He had one slave girl that he really loved very much. So he freed her and he married her. He freed this slave girl and he married her. And the name of this girl was Shajaratud Dur. Shajaratud Dur. Right? She became the wife of Najmuddin Ayyub. Now remember her name, because her role is going to be very big as we move along. Shajaratud Dur. All right. Now during this period, as we mentioned, there was a lot of infighting going on amongst the Ayyubis, and there was also a lot of infighting going on amongst the Christians. The Christians were fighting each other a lot as well. Then in the year 1243 of the Gregorian calendar, which corresponds to the year 641 of the Hijri calendar, the ruler of Jordan and also now the ruler of Jerusalem, An-Nasr Dawood, and also the ruler of Damascus, his name was Al-Malik Al-Salih Ismail. They got into a big dispute with the ruler of Egypt, Najmuddin Ayyub. Now all of them are from the Ayyubi family, right? An-Nasir Dawood is the son of Mu'azzam, who was the son of Adil. And Adil was the brother of Salahuddin Ayyubi. Salih Ismail, who was the ruler of Damascus, he was the son of Adil. He was the nephew of Salahuddin Ayyubi. And Najmuddin Ayyub, the ruler of Egypt, he was the son of Kamil, who was the son of Adil, right? So all of these are from the family of Adil, and they are from the Ayyubids, but they're having disputes with each other. So the ruler of Damascus was Salih Ismail, and the ruler of Jordan and also Jerusalem now was An-Nasir Dawood. The two of them had a big disagreement with Najmuddin Ayyub, the ruler of Egypt. They feared that Najmuddin Ayyub, he's in Egypt, but they feared that he was going to make a move and come into Sham and Philistine to take over their lands, right? So what did they do? What did An-Nasir Dawood and Salih Ismail, what did they do? They sought help from the Christians. They asked the Christians, help us against Najmuddin Ayyub, right? So these two, from the family of the Ayyubids, they're seeking help from the Christians to fight against Najmuddin Ayyub, who is also from the Ayyubids, right? So this is a really sad state of affairs. Muslims seeking the help of Christians to fight against other Muslims. That was the situation. That was the level of division that had come into the Ayyubid state. So the Christians, when they saw this infighting amongst the Muslims within the Ayyubids. They saw this as an opportunity for themselves. So they agreed to help An-Nasir Dawood and Salih Ismail against Najmuddin Ayyub. But the Christians gave one condition. They said that if we help you against Najmuddin Ayyub and we go to Egypt and we take Egypt from him for you, then you must once again return Al-Quds, you must return Jerusalem once again to the Christians, along with some other cities and some other fortresses as well. But the main thing they wanted was Jerusalem. So guess what? An-Nasir Dawood and Salih Ismail, they agreed to this demand. An-Nasir Dawood was the one who just about 4 years before this, he was the one who took Jerusalem back from the Christians. And now just a few years later, he's agreeing to surrender it again back to them. The one who took it now is agreeing to give it back, just so that he can hold on to his own power. This was the level that these people had reached in terms of love for the throne, right? Ready to give up Jerusalem to keep their own power. So they agreed to this. An-Nasir Dawood and Salih Ismail agreed with the Christians that if you help us against Najmuddin Ayyub, we will give you Jerusalem and we'll give you, a few other cities and fortresses as well. So in the year 1243 of the Gregorian calendar, which corresponds to the year 641 of the Hijri calendar, Jerusalem once again was returned for the third time to Christian hands. It was given back to the Christians once again. Now, although both An-Nasir Dawood, who was the ruler of Jordan, and Salih Ismail, who was the ruler of Damascus, both of them came into this agreement with the Christians, but the one who had the largest role in it was Salih Ismail, the ruler of Damascus. He was the one who was the main person behind this agreement, right? The ruler of Damascus, he's one of the main ones who was behind this treachery and this agreement with the Christians to give Jerusalem back to the Christians. So during this period, one of the great scholars of the Ummah, the great scholar of Damascus, known as Sultan al-Ulama, Al-Izz ibn Abd salam, he was there in Damascus during this time, where the ruler of Damascus, Salih Ismail, agreed with the Christians to give Jerusalem back to them. So Al-Izz ibn Abd salam, this great scholar, he announced to the people of Damascus, renounce your bay'ah to Salih Ismail. Renounce your allegiance to this ruler, right? Don't consider him your ruler anymore. He gave Jerusalem back to the Christians. We do not consider him our ruler anymore. So Al-Izz ibn Abd salam, he was a great scholar, very respected, very influential. So his words carried great weight. So it had a great impact upon the people because of the respect that the people had for Al-Izz ibn Abd salam. And because of this, Al-Izz ibn Abd Salam, he was exiled from Damascus. He was forced to flee Damascus and he went to Egypt. He ended up going to Egypt. And then the people of Damascus, they started to speak out against As-Salih Ismail. They began to protest and they began to revolt against him. Right? And he tried to smash this resistance with force. He tried to smash the resistance with force. Now, one of the fortresses that As-Salih Ismail agreed to give the Christians was a fortress that was known as Hisn al-Shuqayq. Right? They agreed to give the Christians Jerusalem, and as we mentioned, some other cities and some other fortresses as well. One of those fortresses was the fortress that was known as Hisn al-Shuqayq. And of course, that was a fortress that was ruled by Muslims, and there were Muslim soldiers that were stationed there. But now As-Salih Ismail tells those Muslim soldiers at Hisn al-Shuqayq, stand down and leave, and the Christians are going to take this fortress. But the Muslim soldiers, they refused. They said, no, we're not going to listen to your command, and we are not going to surrender this fortress to the Christians. They remained in their positions and they refused to take the order of As-Salih Ismail. So what did As-Salih Ismail do? He brought an army himself and he went to Hisn al-Shuqayq and he conquered the fortress himself. He fought against those Muslims. He brought his own Muslim army and he fought against those Muslims who were stationed at the fortress. He fought against them and eventually he defeated them, and once he defeated them, then he welcomed the Christians to go and take over that fortress. He gave it to the Christians. Look at this. Look at the level of treachery of these people, right? A so-called Muslim ruler bringing a Muslim army to fight against a Muslim army to take that fortress and give it to the Christians. This was the level of betrayal and treachery that the situation had reached. Wal-iyadhu billah. So, after this agreement was finalized, As-Salih Ismail and Al-Nasr Dawood, they gave the lands that they agreed to give to the Christians, including Jerusalem. So the Christians once again entered Jerusalem. And this time when the Christians entered Jerusalem, they really disrespected the holy sites in Jerusalem. They went to the Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa area, you know, the area where Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa is and where the Dome of the Rock is, that open area. They went there. They went to the rock, the Sakhra, right? The Dome of the Rock is called Qubbatul Sakhra because there is that rock there, right? So they went to that rock and they sat on that rock and they stood on that rock and they made a big party in that area where they were drinking wine and doing other sorts of bad things. They really disrespected the holy site, right? This was the level of the evil of these Christians who once again went into Jerusalem. So this is really a black, dark chapter in the history of the Ummah, right? Surrendering Jerusalem again to the Christians. So now that these Christians were given what they were promised, then they had to fulfill their end of the deal. What was their end of the deal? Their end of the deal was that they have to help Al-Nasr Dawood and As-Salih Ismail against Najmuddin Ayyub. They have to go to Egypt and try to take Egypt away from Najmuddin Ayyub. So they formed a unified army of Muslims and Christians. Right? The army of Al-Nasr Dawood is a Muslim army. The army of As-Salih Ismail is a Muslim army. And then the Christian army, they joined them as well because they promised that they're going to help. Right? So now it's a mixed Muslim and Christian army heading towards Egypt with the goal of defeating Najmuddin Ayyub and taking the land of Egypt. So Najmuddin Ayyub, he came to know that his relatives, As-Salih Ismail and Nasr Dawood, they have aligned with the Christians and they're bringing an army towards Egypt. So Najmuddin, he came forward with his own army as well. He left Egypt with his army and headed towards the direction of Sham. So they're heading from Sham to Egypt and he's heading from Egypt towards Sham. So where did they come face to face? These two armies came face to face in Gaza, in Palestine. The two armies came face to face in Gaza, in Palestine, and there was a huge battle between both armies in Gaza. A big battle between both of these armies in Gaza. And an amazing thing happened. in this battle. A very amazing thing happened. Remember, the army of An-Nasr Dawood and As-Salih Ismail allied with the Christian army. So it's a mixed Muslim and Christian army, right? So what happened when they reached the place for the battle? The Muslims in the army of As-Salih Ismail and An-Nasr Dawood, the Muslims, they defected to the other side. The Muslims left that army and they went to the army of Najmuddin Ayyub, right? So basically they played a trick on As-Salih Ismail. They made him think, these soldiers made As-Salih Ismail think that they were loyal to him. That yes, we're going to join you, we are united with these Christian soldiers, we're all going to fight together against Najmuddin Ayyub. So these Muslim soldiers, they made As-Salih Ismail think that they were on his side and that they were loyal to him. But really, they were against him. But they were playing the long game here. And they were very angry with him for giving Al-Quds, for giving Jerusalem to the Christians. So they decided, okay, we're going to show him. We're going to show him the consequences of his betrayal. So they played along with him. They said, yes, we will join you, we will march with you towards Egypt, we will fight against Najmuddin Ayyub. But when they reached Gaza, what did they do? They ditched him. All of the Muslims in that army, right? It's an army of Muslims and Christians. The Muslims left. They left, and they didn't just leave, they actually joined the army of the other side. They joined the army of the other side. So this was such a huge surprise and shock. And Alhamdulillah, Najmuddin Ayyub was very pleased with this. Now he has so many more soldiers. Before, the other army was bigger because they had the Christians with them. But now, the army of Najmuddin became stronger and bigger. Alhamdulillah. So this was a surprise and a shock. And you know, this was great planning by the great soldiers of Sham. The soldiers of Sham, they were the ones, by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who flipped the scales. So now all of these Muslims have left the unified Muslim Christian army and joined the exclusively Muslim army of Najmuddin. So now what did it become? It became a battle between the Muslims and the Christians. Because all of the Muslims that were with the Christians, they're not with the Christians anymore. Now they're with the Muslims on the other side. So now it's a pure battle between Muslims and Christians. And Alhamdulillah, the Muslims were victorious. It was a great victory in Gaza. 30,000 Christian soldiers were killed in this battle. And some of the historians later on, they would call this battle the second Hittin. Remember, previously we talked about the battle of Hittin, where Salahuddin defeated the Christians with a very decisive victory, right? This victory in Gaza was similar to that. So some of the historians, they call it like, it's like Hittin number 2, right? So it was a great victory for the Muslims, alhamdulillah. And after this victory, of course, Najmuddin Ayyub, he had Egypt already. Now he took over the lands of An-Nasr Dawood and As-Salih Ismail as well. So now he has basically reunited the Ayyubid kingdom, right? He has basically reunited the Ayyubid kingdom. Egypt, Sham, Palestine, Jordan, right? He has reunited it and he became the ruler of all of those lands. As for As-Salih Ismail himself, who was the ruler of Damascus, he ran away back to Damascus and he thought that he could fortify himself in Damascus. So Najmuddin Ayyub and his forces, they surrounded Damascus. And the people of Damascus themselves, they refused to support As-Salih Ismail. Even though he was technically their ruler, remember, they renounced their bay'ah to him and they did not consider him their ruler anymore. So when he came back into Damascus thinking that he would be safe in Damascus, his own people in Damascus, they said, no, we don't want you, we don't support you. And they said to him, if you stay here, then we will revolt against you, we will uprise against you. So As-Salih Ismail had no other choice, he had no other option. He agreed to leave Damascus. He agreed to leave Damascus and he left Damascus, and with that, Najmuddin Ayyubi, he took over Damascus. He took over Damascus. As for Jerusalem, it was still occupied by the Christians, right? The Christians had been given Jerusalem by An-Nasr Dawood and As-Salih Ismail, so they were still there in Jerusalem. So Najmuddin, he wanted to take Jerusalem back. Najmuddin Ayyubi wanted to take Jerusalem back for the Muslims once again. So once again, he sought the help of the Khawarizmi gangs. Just like a few years earlier, An-Nasr Dawood had gotten the support of the Khawarizmi gangs to take Jerusalem back. Najmuddin did the same thing. Najmuddin Ayyubi, he asked the Khawarizmi gangs to help him retake Jerusalem, and they helped him, just like they helped the Nas of Dawood a few years earlier. So, Alhamdulillah, Najmuddin Ayyubi, with the help of the Khwarizmis, he was easily able to retake Jerusalem from the Christians, and this happened in the year 1244, right? So after 1 year of Christian reoccupation, Najmuddin Ayyubi took Jerusalem back, alhamdulillah. So now Jerusalem once again was back in Muslim hands, alhamdulillah. Jerusalem was once again back in Muslim hands. And this time, this was 1244 of the Gregorian calendar, the year 1244. And this time, Jerusalem remained in Muslim hands for centuries until the occupation of Jerusalem by the British Army in 1917. Right? So, alhamdulillah, this time it remained in Muslim hands for a long period of time, from 1244 all the way to 1917. So, inshallah, we'll stop there for today, bi'idhnillah, and inshallah, next week we will continue with the history of the Holy Land, bi'idhnillah. جزاكم الله خيرا وبارك الله فيكم والله أعلم وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.